So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a Louis, had a track with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could texture whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the Track Extra.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs, and welcome to another episode of On the Track Extra. This week, I want to talk about something which is very dear to my heart. I want to talk about death's head hawkmoths, because if you look at them, they are quite possibly the most iconic moth species in the world. Even if you've never heard of them as insects, you've probably seen them on the film posters for Silence of the Lambs and the book that went with it, and they have also turned up in all sorts of other places, in advertising and in all sorts of occulty-wocculty books, and all because they have a fanciful resemblance to a skull in the marking at the top of the thorax. I don't think they look anything like a skull, but they're interesting enough in their own way. There are actually 3 species of death's head hawkmoth, and they are found in different and non-overlapping parts of the world. These are all in the family Acherontia, and these are Acherontia atropos, otherwise known as the African death's head hawkmoths. This is the most widely recognized of the 3 species. They're commonly found in southern Europe and throughout much of Africa, from which it's considered to be a native species. Annually, they migrate up to parts of northern Europe, including Great Britain, and even as far north as above the Arctic Circle in northern Sweden. The second species is Acherontia styx, the lesser death's head hawkmoth or bee robber. This is found in parts of continental Asia, from northeastern China, where it is a migrant, and Japan, south through eastern China and Vietnam to Peninsula Malaya and Peninsula Thailand. It's also found throughout the islands of the Malay archipelago, central and western China, across northern Thailand, Myanmar, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan and Iran, to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan and Israel. And the third species is Acherontia lachesis, the greater death's head hawkmoth or bee robber. And this is found throughout almost the entire Oriental region, from India, Pakistan and Nepal to the Philippines, and from southern Japan and southern Russian Far East to Indonesia, where it attacks colonies of several different honeybee species. It has recently been established on the Hawaiian Islands. Lachesis is the only one of the 3 species that I've ever seen for myself in the wild, but over the years I have read a great deal about atropos, which, although it is commonly known as the African death's head hawkmoth, is actually the species which comes to Britain. It is the largest moth that is ever found naturally in Britain, and it does turn up on British shores most years in greater or lesser numbers. But it is also a species which dear Guinevere has started to keep in her extension of the CFZ menagerie. Here, one of Gwyn's death's-head hawkmoth caterpillars is preparing to pupate. Unlike other moth species which pupate above ground, a lot of hawk moths, including this species, pupate subterraneally. And, in fact, I unwittingly told you a lie just now when I said that Lachesis was the only species that I had ever encountered in the wild. That's not quite true, because when I was 13 or 14, a local farmer, who was a friend of my father's, a man called John Rafe, who sadly died decades ago, was getting his crop, harvesting his crop, is probably the better word, from his potato field when he found a pupa, a live pupa of this species. We know it was almost certainly the species because potatoes are one of the favoured food plants for larval death's-head hawkmoths. I took it to school and gave it to my biology teacher, who at the time I had great faith in and thought probably knew everything there was to know about animals. But it didn't hatch, and with the benefit of over half a century's experience, I know that it didn't hatch because we didn't put it back underground again and keep it properly moist and humid. However, as you can see here, this one knows what it's doing. It's quite happily preparing for pupation, and if anyone's going to be able to rear it to adulthood, that will be Guinevere. As I have said quite a lot recently, most of my books are now packed up. Some of them are in the attic at Gwyn's house. Some of them are still in my library or in my bedroom, but in old cat food boxes and put neatly on shelves, from which we'll be able to take them, put them into a van and take them down to Exeter as soon as I am able to regain possession of my old house. So I am having to refer to my memory rather than to my library. My two favourite entomologists are L. Hugh Newman, who died in 1993, and Philip Allen, who died about 20 years before that. Both are naturalists from a different time, a time when natural history was a commonly practiced and cherished activity rather than something which is largely forgotten by the masses. They both had idiosyncratic and eminently agreeable, I think is probably the right word, writing styles, and I have been reading both their books for over half a century now, and still find enjoyment in them all every time I pick one up. I can't remember whether it was Newman or Allen who first presented me with one of the strange mysteries about British moths, and that is that although death's-head hawkmoths do fly north every year and most years turn up in British skies, they can breed here, they do breed here, but according to one of these two authors, and I wish I could remember which, but until my books are unpacked, I won't have even the slightest chance of doing so. One of these authors says that when they do breed in Britain, the offspring are always sterile. and this is something I find particularly interesting. I don't know whether the offspring of death's-head hawk moths from other northern European populations are also sterile, and I don't know whether death's-head hawk moths that are bred in captivity in Britain and Northern Europe are actually sterile. This is one of the things that I very much want to find out as a sort of side experiment of Gwyn's exercise in breeding and hopefully setting up a colony of these magnificent insects. One thing that I do remember came from one of Philip Allen's books is that the bodies of this particular species of hawk moths are so bulky that if you are, and most people aren't these days, which is probably a good thing, but if you are a butterfly or moth collector and you are trying to set one of these beautiful, magnificent and slightly creepy looking insects on a setting board, you have to take a scalpel and you have to cut through the underside of their abdomen in order to remove all the guts and replace them with cotton wool, because the abdomen is so bulky it won't dry out like the abdomen of most butterflies and moths when put onto the setting board. I give you that as a piece of mildly interesting information, not because I expect you, me, or anybody else within the CFZ community to suddenly start trying to set and establish a collection of dead hawk moths. But if you do, you know what to watch out for. Fiddle-dee-dee. As you can see from this piece of footage, these creatures are very, very fond of honey. And this is where they get their name, the honey thief, from, because all three of the hawk moth species, of the death's-head hawk moth species, are known to break into beehives in order to steal honey. And there are many accounts on records of a death's-head hawk moth adult being found dead inside a beehive where it has broken in to steal honey and eaten so much honey that it has presumably overdosed on the sugar and died, replete and very fat, and presumably as content as a hawk moth can be. I actually know some people who behave like that as well, but that is, as they say, another story. The final weird fact about death's-head hawk moth species is that the adults will squeak like a mouse. In fact, as far as I'm aware, they are the only moth species which can actually vocalize, and they make indignant squeaks when disturbed. Why they do this, I have no idea. Possibly as a defense mechanism, but possibly for some other reason. And again, once Guinevere has succeeded in setting up a colony of these beautiful and very creepy insects, I want to try to run some experiments to see if we can find out why it is that they have a mouse-like vocalization rather than behaving like all other insects and being quiet. Yes, I know people are now going to say, but crickets and grasshoppers sing. Well, they don't. What they actually do is they rub their back legs against their wing cases, which makes a noise. Whereas, as far as I'm aware, the death's-head hawkmoth squeaks actually come from within its thorax, just like the squeaks of more higher and complex animals. So, assuming that Gwyn manages to set up a colony, we want to find out: 1. Do they breed true? 2. If we have some surplus breeding stock and we can put some of them out to live in her garden rather than being kept indoors, do they manage to produce fertile offspring, or is either Philip Allen or L. Hugh Newman, whichever of them actually said this, and I wish I could remember, are they actually sterile? 3. Are the ones that we have bred inside the comfort of Gwyn's house, are they going to be sterile or are they going to be viable? And 4. Why do they squeak? And can we find out a range of experiments to try to test all the different hypotheses? So, we have death's-head hawkmoths, and I don't know about you, but I think that they are absolutely fantastic little creatures. I wish Gwyn all the luck in the world with them, and I'm going to do my best to encourage her with this and all her other endeavours. So, I'll be back on Saturday. Be seeing you.